My name is Franklin Wade. I'm 61 years old, and I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. For 34 years, I have run Wade & Sons Custom Cabinetry, a business I built out of a two-car garage in 1992 with $4,000 of savings, a second-hand table saw, and a wife who believed in me more than the numbers said she should. I'm telling you this up front because everything that happened in the year I'm about to describe happened, in one way or another, because a certain kind of person looked at a man who builds cabinets for a living and decided he could not possibly be dangerous. The phone rang at 7 minutes past 2 in the morning. It buzzed against the nightstand like something trying to claw its way out of the wood, and I had it in my hand before the second ring finished, because a phone that rings at that hour is never selling you anything. It is only ever taking something away. My daughter's voice came through in a whisper so tight it barely had breath behind it. "Dad, please come get me." I sat up in the dark with my heart slamming against my ribs like a fist on a locked door. "Claire, where are you? Are you hurt?" A pause, fabric rustling. Somewhere in the background, a door clicked shut, soft and deliberate, the way a door sounds when someone doesn't want it to be heard closing. And then a second voice, older, colder, cutting in from somewhere very close to the phone. Close enough that I understood she had been standing there the whole time. "She's not going anywhere. Put that down." The line went dead. I was already pulling on my boots before my mind had caught up with what my hands were doing. Beside me, my wife Ellen was awake and upright, the lamp on, her face doing the thing it does in a crisis. Going very still, very focused, the way it did 30 years ago when a lumber supplier tried to walk back a contract 2 days before our biggest install. She didn't ask what happened. She asked the better question. "What do you need?" "Keys," I said, "and call her back every 90 seconds until someone answers." Before I take you into that night, and into the year that followed it, a year of quiet investigation, of forensic accountants and hidden bank accounts, of a recording made in a kitchen and a birthday toast that ended a woman's reign in front of 30 witnesses, I want to ask you something. If you've ever had someone in your life look down on you, underestimate you, mistake your kindness for weakness, then this story is going to feel familiar in ways that might make your hands tighten a little. If that's you, do me a favor, subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell, because I share stories like this one every week, true to life and told the way they actually unfold, slowly and then all at once. Now, let me tell you what was waiting for me at the end of that phone call. The voice on the line, the older one, the cold one, belonged to Margaret Colby, my daughter's mother-in-law, and what I did not know that night, pulling my truck out of the driveway into the dark, with my hazards off and my speedometer climbing, was that Margaret had spent the better part of a year, quietly, methodically dismantling my daughter's life. Her marriage, her finances, and very nearly, her name on the deed of a house I had personally co-signed a $340,000 mortgage on, 18 months earlier, as a wedding gift to two young people I believed were building a future together. I was about to find out how wrong I was, but to understand how a family gets to a 2 a.m. phone call, you have to understand how it got to the wedding in the first place. So let me back up. Let me tell you who we are, and who she thought we were, because the entire war that followed was fought in the space between those two things. I met Ellen in 1988 at a hardware store on the south side of Pittsburgh, where she was working the register, and I was buying wood glue I couldn't quite afford. She rang me up, looked at my hands, split knuckles, sawdust in the creases, and said, "You're either a carpenter or you lost a fight with a porcupine." I married her 14 months later. We honeymooned for 2 nights in a motel near Erie, because that was what we had, and I have never once heard her describe those 2 nights as anything less than perfect. When I started Wade & Sons in 1992, the Sons was a hope, not a fact. What we got instead was a daughter, and I want to say clearly, for the record, and for every father listening, I never once felt shortchanged. Claire came into the world in 1997 yelling loud enough to rattle the maternity ward windows, and she has never really stopped making herself heard since. Or at least, she hadn't, until the year I'm telling you about. That was one of the first things I should have noticed. My loud, funny, stubborn daughter had gone quiet. Quiet is how it starts. Remember that. The business grew the way honest businesses grow, which is to say slowly and painfully. I missed dinners. I missed a school play in 2005 that I still think about. But by the time Claire was in high school, Wade & Sons had 11 employees. a shop off Butler Street with our name on the sign, and a reputation in 3 counties for cabinets that outlived the marriages of the people who ordered them. Today, the company does $2.3 million a year in revenue. It put Claire through Penn State without a dime of debt. I don't tell you these numbers to brag. I tell you because Margaret Colby would later stand in my daughter's kitchen, drinking my daughter's wine, and describe all of it. 34 years of 5A. Mo mornings as sawdust and staples. I want you to have the real numbers in your head when we get to that part. Claire met Nathan Colby 6 years ago at a fundraiser for a children's literacy program downtown. He was polite, soft-spoken, good-looking in an unthreatening way, and he ran a small landscaping company, Colby Outdoor Services, with 8 guys and 2 trucks. I liked him. I want to be honest about that, because it would be easy, telling this story from the far side of it, to pretend I saw everything coming. I didn't. I saw a young man who stood up when Ellen entered the room, who asked me questions about the business and actually listened to the answers, and who looked at my daughter like she was the answer to a question he'd been asking his whole life. What I also saw at the engagement dinner was his mother. Margaret Colby arrived 20 minutes late to a restaurant she had chosen, wearing a cream cashmere cardigan and an expression that suggested the restaurant had disappointed her by existing. She was 63 then, widowed young. Nathan's father died when the boy was 9, and she carried herself like a woman who had decided long ago that the world owed her a debt it kept failing to pay. She shook my hand the way you'd handle a tool you weren't sure was clean. "Franklin," she said, "Nathan tells me you're in woodworking, custom cabinetry," I said. 30 years this spring. "How rustic," she said and smiled and turned to the waiter. Ellen's hand found my knee under the table. One squeeze. Our old signal, older than our daughter. "Not here, not now, we'll talk in the truck." In the truck, an hour and a half later, Ellen stared out the windshield for a long moment and said, "That woman is going to be a problem." "She's a snob," I said. "Snobs are harmless. They insult you at dinner and then they go home. I have been wrong about a great many things in my life. Lumber futures in 2008. A business partner in 1999. The Steelers, most Januaries. But I have never been as wrong about anything as I was in that truck, telling my wife that Margaret Colby was harmless. The wedding, 3 years ago, was beautiful, and I paid for most of it, and Margaret spent the reception telling her side of the aisle, audibly, that the venue was charming in a homemade sort of way. At the rehearsal dinner, she had raised a glass to the couple and said, with a smile I would learn to recognize the way a sailor learns to recognize weather, to Nathan and Claire, "Marriage is such an education, Claire dear. I do hope you're a quick study." People laughed because people laugh at toasts. Claire laughed too, a beat late. I watched my daughter's face perform happiness for a room, and I filed it away, and I did nothing because it was her wedding day, and because I still believed the oldest lie there is about people like Margaret, that words are only words. 18 months into the marriage, the kids found a house they loved in Squirrel Hill, a brick 4-bedroom with a yard Nathan kept immaculate, because whatever else I will say about that young man, he knew how to work. The mortgage was $340,000, and their 2 incomes together were solid but young, and the bank wanted a cosigner. I said yes before Claire finished the sentence. Ellen and I talked about it exactly once, at the kitchen table, and her only question was, "Are we helping them stand, or are we carrying them?" "Helping them stand," I said, and at the time, it was true. What neither of us knew was that we weren't the only ones with plans for that house. Margaret Colby had plans for it too. Hers just didn't include my daughter. The dismantling of my daughter did not happen in one dramatic scene. That's not how it works, and if you take nothing else from this story, take this. The people who take things from you rarely kick down the door. They get themselves invited in, and then they move the furniture 1 inch at a time, until the day you look up and realize you no longer live in your own life. It started, as near as we could later reconstruct, about a year before the phone call. Margaret's lease on her apartment in Shadyside was ending, and there was a story about the building being sold, and renovations, and wouldn't it just be temporary? And Nathan, who had spent his whole childhood watching his widowed mother sacrifice, and who had been raised on a steady diet of "you're all I have, Nathan," said of course. Of course she could stay in the guest room, just until she found something suitable. Nothing Margaret ever found in the next 11 months was suitable. She moved in with 4 suitcases and an opinion about everything. Within a month, she had rearranged Claire's kitchen. It simply flows better this way, dear, and replaced the family photos in the front hall with framed prints she preferred. When Claire moved the photos back, Margaret moved them again, and when Claire raised it with Nathan, he sighed and rubbed his eyes and said, "She's been through a lot. Can we just pick our battles?" That sentence, I would come to learn, was the load-bearing wall of my son-in-law's entire personality. Pick our battles. He said it so often that Claire eventually understood the truth inside it. In this house, no battle would ever be worth picking, because every battle was with his mother, and his mother always won. There were the small cruelties, delivered with a hostess smile. Margaret commenting on Claire's portion sizes at dinner. Margaret introducing Claire to her friends as Nathan's wife. "She works, you know," in a tone that made employment sound like a diagnosis. Margaret gifting Claire a book on household management for Christmas, in front of the whole family, wrapped in gold paper. There was the Sunday she tidied Claire's home office, and 3 years of Claire's design notebooks went out with the recycling. An accident, of course. Margaret was so terribly sorry. She said so twice, smiling, and then asked what time dinner was. And my daughter, my loud, funny, stubborn daughter, went quiet 1 inch at a time. We saw her less. The Sunday dinners at our place became every other Sunday, then monthly, then a text. "So sorry, something came up." When we did see her, she'd lost weight, and she had developed a new habit of glancing at her phone, not like she was hoping for a message, but like she was bracing for one. Ellen noticed it first, because Ellen notices everything first. Driving home one night last spring, she said, "Franklin, when's the last time you heard Claire laugh?" Actually laugh? I couldn't remember. That should have been the alarm. I told myself marriages have seasons. I told myself the last thing a struggling couple needs is a father-in-law with opinions. There is a kind of respect that curdles into neglect if you're not careful. And I was so busy being respectful of my daughter's marriage that I failed to notice it was eating her alive. Then came the Tuesday in March that Claire told me about only much later, after everything, sitting at our kitchen table with her hands around a mug she never drank from. She'd come home early from work with a headache. She was already in the door, keys still in her hand, when she heard laughter from the kitchen. Margaret's laugh, sharp, performative, the kind she kept for an audience. Claire stopped in the hallway. Through the doorway she could see Margaret sitting at the kitchen island in the cream cashmere cardigan, a glass of Claire's good Sancerre in her hand. A bottle Claire had been saving for her anniversary. Talking to a woman Claire didn't recognize, who turned out to be Susan Whitfield from Margaret's bridge club. "Honestly, Susan, the girl means well," Margaret was saying, swirling the wine, "but you should see how she keeps this kitchen. I had to have Nathan get her a cleaning service, because I was not about to eat off these counters. And the money, my God, don't get me started on where Daddy's money actually comes from. Sawdust and Staples, if you ask me. Nathan deserves so much better, but he's loyal. Too loyal, honestly." My daughter stood in the hallway of her own home for almost a full minute, holding her purse, listening to a woman drink her anniversary wine and describe her father's life's work as sawdust and Staples to a stranger. And then she did the thing that broke my heart most in this entire story. She didn't go in, she backed out of her own front door, silently, the way you'd retreat from a stranger's house you'd entered by mistake. She sat in her car in her own driveway for 20 minutes, until she could breathe normally enough to drive. She never told me, not then. When I asked her later why, she said, "Because it would have hurt you more than it hurt me, Dad." She was wrong about that. Nothing on this earth hurts a father more than learning his child absorbed a wound to spare him, but I understand why she believed it. She had been living for months inside a house where her feelings were a scheduling inconvenience. She had simply learned the local customs. What none of us understood yet, not Claire, not me, not even Nathan, in the way that a man can technically know a thing and still not understand it, was that the insults were not the point. The insults were weather. Underneath the weather, Margaret Colby was moving money, and by that Tuesday in March, she had been moving it for months. Now let me take you back to the night of the phone call, because I left you in my truck with the speedometer climbing, and I owe you the rest of that drive. It takes 19 minutes to get from our place to Squirrel Hill at 2 in the morning. I did it in 14. Ellen stayed on the phone the whole way, redialing Claire, and on the 4th try, Claire picked up, and her voice was steadier. The steadiness of someone who has locked a bathroom door behind her. She was not hurt. I want to say that plainly, because I know where your mind goes at 2 a.m. Mine went there too at 90 miles an hour on Route 28. Nobody had touched her. What had happened was in some ways smaller and in some ways worse. That evening, Claire had opened a piece of mail that had been sitting in a stack. Margaret always insisted on organizing. It was addressed to Claire and Nathan both. It was from Keystone Trust Bank, and it was a late notice. Their mortgage, the mortgage on the house she lived in, the mortgage her own father had co-signed, was 2 payments behind. Claire had stood in the kitchen holding that letter and feeling the floor of her life tilt, because she and Nathan both had good incomes, because she transferred her share to the household account on the first of every month like a heartbeat, and because none of the math in front of her made any sense. She had asked Nathan about it quietly in their bedroom. And before Nathan could answer, I want you to picture this. Before her own husband could answer a question about their own mortgage, in their own bedroom, the door had opened without a knock, and Margaret had stepped in and said, "Whatever this is, it can wait until morning. Nathan needs his rest." Into their bedroom, without knocking, at 1 in the morning. And Nathan had looked at his wife and looked at his mother and said, "We'll figure it out tomorrow, Claire, okay?" And that, Claire told me later, was the exact moment. Not the wine, not the notebooks in the recycling, not 2 years of 1,000 paper cuts. It was watching her husband choose the path of least resistance one time too many, at 1 a.m. With a late notice on the bed between them. She waited until the house went quiet. She called me from the bathroom with the fan running. And when Margaret, who I am convinced slept with one ear open the way predators do, appeared in the hallway and heard her whispering, she'd said the sentence I will hear for the rest of my life. She's not going anywhere. Put that down. Here is what you need to understand about that sentence. Margaret did not mean it as a threat of violence, and if you'd put her on a witness stand, she'd have said, correctly, that she simply meant the conversation should happen at a decent hour. People like Margaret always have a respectable translation ready. But a woman who believes she has the authority to stand in a hallway at 2 in the morning and tell a grown woman she's not going anywhere is telling you everything about the government she has installed inside that house. I heard it in 4 words. My daughter had been living under it for a year. When I pulled up, Claire came out the front door with a coat over her pajamas and a canvas bag she'd packed in 90 seconds, and behind her in the doorway lit from the hall stood Margaret Colby in a quilted robe, arms folded, watching. She did not say a word to me. She didn't need to. Her face said what her mouth would later say into a recording device she didn't know existed. This man is nothing. Nathan was somewhere behind her in the house. He did not come out. I want that on the record too. My daughter walked to my truck at 2:30 in the morning, and her husband did not come out. Claire stayed with us in her old room, for a little space. Those were her words, and Ellen and I honored them. We did not interrogate her. We fed her. Ellen sat with her over tea in the evenings and let silence do the work that questions can't. And me? I did what I do when something's wrong and I don't yet know its shape. I started measuring. 34 years in business teaches you that the truth of any situation lives in the paperwork, not in the explanations. The morning after the phone call, I pulled my copy of the mortgage documents. Because I keep every document always, a habit Margaret would come to regret, and I called Keystone Trust Bank. I identified myself as the co-signer, gave them the loan number, and asked for a current statement. The woman on the phone was pleasant and thorough. The account was 2 payments behind, 61 days. A third missed payment would trigger a formal delinquency process that would land squarely on my credit as well as theirs. 2 payments behind, on a household with 2 healthy incomes, on a house whose loan I had guaranteed with my name and my life's work. I thanked her, hung up, and sat in my shop office for a long while with the invoices I was supposed to be doing that morning untouched in front of me. Then I called Nathan. I kept my voice level, the voice I use when a client tries to lowball an invoice, the voice that sounds like patience and is actually arithmetic. "Nathan, the mortgage is 2 payments behind. I'm on that loan. What's going on?" He didn't miss a beat. That's the detail that stayed with me. A man caught off guard stammers. Nathan answered like a man who had rehearsed. "Bob, Franklin, it's a cash flow timing thing, that's all. Mom's been helping us restructure our debt-to-income ratio so we can refinance at a better rate next year. She's got a guy at her bank who does this for a living. It's all above board. We moved some funds into an escrow bridge account temporarily. It'll self-correct by third quarter. Escrow bridge account. Debt-to-income ratio. Self-correct by third quarter. I have spent 3 decades around bankers and contractors, and I have learned that when a man who mows lawns for a living suddenly starts talking like a prospectus, someone has been feeding him lines. It sounded reasonable. It was also, I would soon confirm, complete fiction. There is no such instrument as an escrow bridge account, not at any bank in Pennsylvania or anywhere else. I told Nathan that made sense. I thanked him for the update. I wished him a good week, and I hung up, and inside me something went very cold and very still and very patient. Ellen came out to the shop that evening and found me at the drafting table with a legal pad, and she read the look on my face, the way she's read it for 30 years. "You're going to pull the thread," she said. "I'm going to pull the thread." She nodded once. "Pull it all the way, Franklin. Whatever's on the other end, she's our daughter." The next morning I hired Vivian Marsh. Vivian Marsh is a forensic accountant I'd used once before, years ago, in a dispute with a supplier who had been double billing us in ways too clever for my regular bookkeeper to see. She is a sharp, unshowy woman in her 50s who dresses like a librarian and thinks like a homicide detective. And the first thing she said when I laid it all out in her office downtown: "The late payments, the phantom escrow account, the mother-in-law with a banker, who does this for a living," was this: "Mr. Wade, in my experience, when family money goes missing, and the explanation has that many syllables in it, the money isn't missing. It's been relocated. The only questions are where and in whose name." I gave her everything I could legally access as a cosigner, and Claire, once Ellen and I sat her down and gently told her what I'd found, gave Vivian full authorization on everything in her own name. I want to pause on Claire for a moment, because her reaction taught me something. I expected tears. What I got was stillness, and then a question delivered in a voice I recognized, because it was my voice, the one I use for lowball invoices. "How long has it been going on?" My daughter had spent a year being sanded down into someone quiet, but the grain underneath was still Wade. You could see it come back into her face in that room, and I will tell you honestly, of everything that happened that year, watching my daughter's spine return is the part I'd pay to relive. 2 weeks later, Vivian handed me a folder that turned my stomach. There was no escrow bridge account. There never had been. What there was, instead, was a joint checking account at a small bank across town. An account opened 11 months earlier in the names of Nathan Colby and Margaret Colby. My daughter's name appeared nowhere on it. Into that account, month after month, Nathan had been depositing roughly half of his take-home pay from the landscaping company. The total, by the time Vivian's report landed on my desk, $47,600. $47,600 of household income, quietly diverted out of a marriage, while the mortgage on the marriage house went unpaid. And from that account, the money had kept moving. $31,000 of it had gone out in a single wire 4 months earlier, as a deposit on a 1-bedroom condominium on Belmont Street, in a building 40 minutes away, in a transaction with exactly one name on it: Margaret Colby. Sit with that the way I had to. The woman living rent-free in my daughter's guest room, drinking my daughter's anniversary wine, calling my life's work sawdust and staples. That woman had been using her son's paychecks to build herself an exit, and she had been funding that exit by starving the mortgage my name was on. Every insult at every dinner had been a magician's left hand. The right hand was at the bank. Now, you're asking the question everyone asks, so let's deal with it honestly. How does a grown man hand his mother half his income for 11 months and hide it from his wife? Is he a villain or an idiot? And the answer, which took me a long time and no small amount of anger to arrive at, is neither. He was something more common and more dangerous than either. He was trained. Nathan was 9 years old when his father died. Margaret raised him alone, and to hear her tell it, and she told it constantly, at every holiday like a national anthem, she had sacrificed everything for that boy. And maybe she had. But somewhere along the way, the sacrifice became a debt, and the debt became a leash. Nathan grew up inside a simple arithmetic. His mother's happiness was his responsibility, and his mother's disappointment was his failure. She had spent 30 years perfecting the mechanism. A sigh from Margaret could reorganize that man's entire week. So when Margaret came to him, and Vivian's timeline suggests this happened about a month after she moved in, with a story about her retirement savings being tied up, about needing help establishing financial independence so she wouldn't be a burden, about how Claire wouldn't understand, how wives never understand, how this would just be between us, Nathan, the way it's always been. He didn't experience it as betraying his wife. He experienced it as being a good son. That is what a skilled manipulator does. She doesn't ask you to do wrong. She rearranges the room until wrong is the only door marked exit. I'm not excusing him. Let me be clear about that, because this matters for everything that comes later. A 32-year-old man is responsible for his signature. Every deposit was a choice, and he made that choice about 22 times, while his wife balanced a household budget that had been secretly cut in half and blamed herself for the numbers not working. Claire told us she had spent months thinking she was bad with money. She'd made spreadsheets. She'd canceled her gym membership. She'd stopped buying her coffee on the way to work, while thousands of dollars a month walked quietly out the back door of her marriage. There is a particular cruelty in letting someone believe they are the leak, when they are, in fact, the only one bailing water. I don't forgive that. But I understood, reading Vivian's folder, that I was looking at two different kinds of guilt. A weak man, and the woman who had spent 3 decades manufacturing his weakness. And I decided, right then at my desk, with the sawdust I'm told so little of hanging in the afternoon light, that my response would honor that difference. The last piece of the picture came almost by accident, and it changed the legal landscape of everything. Claire went back to the house one Saturday to collect more of her things. I drove her, and I waited in the truck in the driveway, because I did not trust what my hands might do inside that house. She left the front door slightly open behind her, and through it, floating out over the lawn Nathan kept so beautifully, came Margaret's voice from the kitchen. Not troubling to lower itself, because why would it? In her kingdom, the walls were loyal. She'll be gone within the year, Nathan, mark my words, and then you sign that condo over the way we discussed, and none of it touches you in the divorce. Her father's too soft to make trouble. The man builds cabinets for a living. He's not exactly lawyering up. I sat in that driveway with both hands on the wheel, at 10 and 2, like a student driver, because I did not trust them anywhere else. Soft, she'd called me soft. I have been called worse by better people, and it has never once been the insult that landed. It was the word, divorce, spoken in my daughter's kitchen like a delivery date. This wasn't drift. This wasn't a mother-in-law who couldn't let go. This was a project with a timeline and a payout, and my daughter was the demolition site. And in that driveway, gripping that wheel, I made the most important decision of this entire story. I decided that Margaret Colby was exactly right about me. Or rather, I decided to let her keep thinking so. I want to explain the thinking here, because this decision is the hinge the whole story turns on, and because some of you, in your own lives, may one day stand where I stood. When you discover you've been wronged, every instinct in your body votes for the same candidate. Confrontation. March in. Raise your voice. Throw the folder on the table. And I understand the appeal. It feels like strength. But I've negotiated contracts for 34 years, and here is what those years taught me. The moment you reveal what you know, you stop learning anything new. Confrontation would have gotten me one satisfying evening and a lifetime of she said, he said. Margaret would have called Vivian's folder a misunderstanding, hired a lawyer with her son's money, and spent the next 2 years painting me at every dinner party as the unhinged father-in-law who ambushed a widow. No. Margaret had built her entire architecture on a single foundation, her certainty that I was a harmless checkbook-writing father who wouldn't know a forensic audit from a fishing license. So I decided to give her exactly that man. At the next family dinner, because yes, there were still family dinners, Ellen and I agreed that maintaining normalcy was operationally essential, and Claire, who was in on every step from this point forward, agreed. I showed up in my work flannel with sawdust still on the cuffs, even though I hadn't set foot in the shop that day. I let my hearing aid act up twice, asking Margaret to repeat herself, watching her sigh, with that barely concealed impatience she wore like jewelry. When Nathan nervously mentioned the refinancing again, I nodded slowly, let my eyes go pleasantly vague, and said, whatever you two think is best. I never understood all that banking stuff anyway. I let my shoulders round forward. I let my fork hover, indecisive, over the same piece of chicken for 3 full minutes. I asked Margaret twice to explain what an HOA was. Ellen caught my eye once across the table, and to anyone else her face was a wife's polite blankness, But I've been married to that face for 36 years, and it was laughing. She knew exactly what I was doing, because she'd watched me do it across bargaining tables for 3 decades. She has seen me close six-figure contracts by pretending I couldn't do long division. Here is the principle, and write it down. A confused old man asks no threatening questions, and a confused old man gets shown the whole board, because nobody hides their cards from a player they've decided has already lost. Margaret relaxed around me in a way I could measure week to week. She began making her little comments with less caution and more relish. She talked over me. She explained Pittsburgh to me, a city I have lived in for 61 years. And all the while, Vivian Marsh and I were building the trap. We drafted a document, a refinancing proposal on convincing letterhead from a mortgage brokerage, offering to consolidate the Colby household debt at a rate favorable enough to make anyone with a hidden account very nervous. Because the offer came with one condition, printed in the bland font of bureaucratic inevitability. All account holders, and any parties contributing to household finances, would need to disclose complete financial records for underwriting review. Full statements, all accounts, every name. Understand what this document was engineered to do. It threatened nothing, it accused no one. It simply announced, politely, that daylight was coming, and people who have buried something react to approaching daylight in a very specific way. They check on the grave. I accidentally left a printed copy on the kids' kitchen table during a visit, tucked inside a folder of the company's cabinetry invoices. The kind of paperwork Margaret had made abundantly clear she found beneath her notice, which is precisely why I knew she'd read every page the moment I left. And I mentioned, vaguely unprompted, in my best doddering voice, that my accountant was helping me get my affairs in order for retirement, and that I might be restructuring some of my assets soon. Restructuring, assets, lawyer words drifting out of the mouth of a man she'd filed under harmless. Then I went home, and I waited. I'll be honest with you. There was one moment the whole thing nearly came apart. About a week after I planted the document, Margaret called me. Directly. She had never once called me in 3 years. Her voice was warm the way a freezer door is warm when you first touch it, and she asked, so casually, so conversationally, which accounting firm I used, because she'd been thinking of tidying up her own affairs. Widows have to be so careful. I understood immediately what the call was, a probe. She'd read the document, something had snagged. And for about 4 seconds holding that phone, I felt the whole structure sway. If I answered too crisply, too knowledgeably, the harmless old cabinet man would flicker, and she would see the shape behind him. So I did the only thing I could. I gave her the name of my actual accountant, mispronounced his firm twice, went on a 90-second tangent about how all these young fellows want to do everything on the computer now, and then asked her, with complete sincerity, whether she knew if you could still get paper statements mailed to the house. By the end of the call, she was audibly bored. Boredom, from Margaret Colby, was a passing grade. She hung up convinced, I believe, of the only thing I needed her to be convinced of, that I was not a variable worth solving for. 2 days later came the recording. Now the legal part, because it matters and because we did this correctly. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state. Claire, a resident of that house, a party to its conversations, acting with full knowledge of what we were doing and why, left her own phone on her own kitchen counter, propped inside an open cookbook, screen down, microphone up, recording. Nothing about it was hidden surveillance of a private space she had no claim to. It was a woman documenting what was said in her own home. Vivian had walked us through the statute line by line before we so much as touched the record button, and I'd add, if you ever find yourself in a situation like this one, that is step 1. Know your state's law before you gather a single thing, because evidence collected wrong is worse than no evidence at all. Claire puttered through the house that afternoon collecting more of her belongings, then made a point of mentioning, on her way out the door, that her dad's accountant needed some old tax documents from her. For the restructuring. A pebble tossed into still water. Then she got in my truck and we drove 3 houses down, and we parked and we waited, my own phone on the dashboard between us. 40 minutes in, it happened. Margaret's voice, unmistakable, came through the feed, pitched low and urgent in a way I had never heard from her. The hostess lacquer completely gone, and underneath it something bare and cold and fast. If he's really restructuring his estate, Nathan, then we need Claire's name off that house paperwork, before he finds out about the condo money. Do you understand me? I don't want a whiff of this reaching whatever lawyer he's suddenly playing footsie with. The old fool doesn't know a mortgage from a miter saw, but I'm not taking chances. Beside me, my daughter went very still, listening to the woman who lived in her house plan the amputation of her name from it. And me, I sat with my hand flat on the dashboard, steadying myself, and I felt something settle into place in my chest, quiet as a cabinet door closing on good hinges. Not anger, I was past anger, certainty. She had said it out loud. Names, intentions, the condo, the deed, the timeline, all of it in her own voice in a recording that was legal in every particular. Vivian filed the paperwork for a civil suit on Claire's behalf the following week and held it, ready. All that remained was the question of venue. And on that question, I'll confess, I allowed myself one indulgence. Margaret Colby had spent 3 years staging her little humiliations in front of audiences, at engagement dinners, at wedding toasts, at every table she could command. She was a performer. She believed in theater. So we gave her theater. Claire's 30th birthday fell 3 weeks later, and Margaret, who never missed a chance to host, because hosting is a throne, insisted on a dinner at Laurel Ridge Country Club. Her turf, her rules, her audience, 30 guests, including 2 women from her bridge club and a scattering of club acquaintances she'd invited less to celebrate Claire than to display her. We accepted graciously. Ellen picked out my good jacket, and at my quiet request, seated near the back of the room at a table by the window, was Vivian Marsh, in a navy dress, with a slim leather folder beside her bread plate, looking for all the world like somebody's pleasant cousin. I want to say something before I tell you what happened, because I've thought about this a great deal. Some people hearing this story will say we ambushed her, and that decent people handle things privately. And to them I say, we tried private. Private is where Margaret did her best work. Private is a hallway at 2 in the morning. Private is a bedroom door opening without a knock. People like Margaret Colby maintain 2 selves. The public self, gracious and beyond reproach, and the private self, doing the actual business. And they survive precisely because the world never makes the 2 selves stand in the same room. All we did in the end was introduce them to each other, and besides, she drew first. She always did. 2 glasses of Chardonnay in, Margaret rose, rang her knife gently against her flute, and raised a toast. She delivered it the way she delivered everything, like a blade wrapped in ribbon. To Claire, she said, smiling around the table, warm as a portrait, who I hope in this next year finally learns what it means to run a proper household. The way she was raised, bless her father's efforts, isn't quite the way we do things in this family. A few guests laughed, the uncertain laughter of people who suspect they've just watched something cruel, but can't find the wound. Under the table, Claire's hand found mine, one squeeze. Our signal, hers and mine, learned from her mother, not fear. Go. I stood up. I did not raise my voice. I never raise my voice. Anyone who's built anything knows the power tools do the shouting and the measuring is done quietly. Margaret, before we drink to that, I think there's something this table should know. Since you've brought up how families do things, the room went quiet the way rooms do when they smell blood. Margaret's smile stayed exactly where it was, but I watched her recalculate me in real time. Watched the harmless old cabinet man she'd been dining out on for 3 years flicker, and something else step out from behind him. 11 months ago, I said. Conversationally, the way you'd discuss weather, you convinced my son-in-law to open a joint bank account that his wife knew nothing about and to root half of his income into it. $47,600 at last count. $31,000 of that left the account 4 months ago as a deposit on a 1-bedroom condominium on Belmont Street. The name on that deposit is not Nathan's, and it is certainly not Claire's. It's yours. Forks stopped. Somewhere at the far end, a chair creaked and then thought better of it. This is a private family matter, Franklin, Margaret said. Her voice was even, but her knuckles had gone white around the stem of her glass. It stopped being private, I said, when the mortgage I co-signed went 2 payments delinquent while the money to pay it sat in your account. And when you told me, through Nathan, that it was a refinancing strategy. There is no escrow bridge account, Margaret. There is no guy at your bank. There is you, draining your son's marriage to fund your exit, before pushing my daughter out of it. You have no idea what you're. I heard you, I said, and for the first time all evening I let 1 degree of the temperature underneath show, through, just one, and the room felt it. In the kitchen. telling Nathan to get Claire's name off the deed before I, quote, found out about the condo money. The old fool, you said, doesn't know a mortgage from a miter saw. I paused. For the record, Margaret, a miter saw is the one that cuts at angles. I own 11 of them. I nodded once to the back of the room. Vivian Marsh rose unhurried, crossed the floor in absolute silence. 30 people watching a woman in a navy dress the way you'd watch weather arrive, and set the slim leather folder down gently in front of Margaret. Bank statements. The wire receipt for the Belmont Street deposit. A certified transcript of the kitchen recording, time-stamped. Nathan, I said, turning to my son-in-law, who sat gray as unpainted primer, and my voice came out quieter still. Because what I had for him was different from what I had for her. Your wife made that recording in her own home, with my full knowledge, under Pennsylvania's one-party consent law. Miss Marsh can recite you the statute if you'd like. We could have simply filed everything and let a courtroom hand you the surprise. We didn't, and I want you to understand why. It's because Claire, even now, loves you enough to want you to hear it in a room where you could still choose to be the man who didn't know, instead of the man who helped. That window is closing tonight, son. Right now, in front of everyone your mother invited. Margaret stood so fast her chair scraped a scream out of the parquet. You had no right to record anything in. Pennsylvania is a one-party consent state, Vivian said mildly from where she stood, in the tone of a woman confirming a lunch reservation. Her phone, her home, her marriage, it's all admissible. And then, I'll tell you exactly what I did, because I've replayed it many times and I stand by every second of it. I reached across the table and picked up the champagne flute, in front of Claire, the one Margaret's toast had been aimed at like an instrument. I held it a moment, and then I set it back down on the linen, deliberately unhurried, bass first, so that it made a single clean sound in that silent room. The sound of a thing being put down for good. We're done pretending you're the standard this family measures itself against, I said. You're not. You never were. You were just the loudest person at the table, and tonight, Margaret, that's over too. At the entrance to the dining room, 2 men in plain gray suits, who had been quietly nursing club sodas at the bar for the better part of an hour, rose and approached the table. Not police. I want to be precise, because precision is the whole difference between justice and spectacle. They were a licensed process server and Vivian's investigator, and what they carried was service of process. The civil complaint Vivian had filed on Claire's behalf days earlier, together with the emergency motion already granted that morning, freezing the joint account and the Belmont Street deposit pending the court's review. The server confirmed her identity, placed the documents in front of her, said the 11 words his job requires, and stepped back. That's all serving papers is in real life. No handcuffs, no shouting. Just an envelope that means the part of your life where no one checked your math is now over. Margaret Colby stood in her cream cashmere cardigan, in the club she had made her cathedral, holding a folder containing her own voice in front of 30 people who 90 seconds earlier had believed she was the gracious hostess of the evening. And for the first time in the 3 years I had known her, she could not find a single word. The silence where her voice should have been was, I admit, a sound I had traveled a long way to hear. Claire stood up beside me. She looked at her husband for a long moment, not with hatred, with inventory. Then she picked up her coat, thanked the guests nearest her for coming with a graciousness her grandmother would have recognized, and walked out of that dining room, the way you walk out of a house you have finally stopped paying for. Ellen and I followed. At the door I turned back once. Nathan had not moved. He was staring at the folder in front of his mother like a man reading his own handwriting in a confession he didn't remember signing. And Margaret was looking around the room, table to table, face to face, doing the only arithmetic she had ever truly cared about, and finding in every direction the same closing number. In the 6 weeks that followed, the consequences moved fast, the way they tend to once the first domino tips. The civil suit and the freeze order caught the Belmont Street purchase before closing, and the seller, a retired dentist with no appetite for being deposed in someone else's family litigation, exercised his right to walk away entirely. Margaret lost her $31,000 deposit outright, non-refundable as it turned out, a detail buried in a clause she had never bothered to read closely, because reading things closely was for people like me. There is a poetry in that I won't pretend I don't savor. The woman lost her escape hatch to fine print. Keystone Trust Bank, presented with Vivian's documentation, flagged the joint account for review under its financial coercion protocols. Nathan cooperated fully, and I'll give him this much. Once the scope of what his mother had built became undeniable, he did not spend a single day defending it. He closed the account and had the remaining $16,600 transferred back into the household account. In both names, this time. He also, on his own initiative, brought the mortgage current with a check that I know for a fact emptied his business's cash reserve, and he did it without telling anyone, which is the closest thing to character I'd seen from him in a year. The social consequences arrived on quieter feet and cut deeper because they struck the only currency Margaret had ever valued. Word travels in that particular zip code, the way fire travels through a lumberyard. Her bridge club, including Susan Whitfield, the woman who'd sipped anniversary wine in my daughter's kitchen, simply stopped calling. No confrontation, no drama. The Thursday game just became permanently full. Her membership at Laurel Ridge, originally sponsored by a friend who had been sitting 6 feet away during the toast, came up for renewal that spring and quietly wasn't. The invitation stopped. The phone stopped. Margaret Colby had spent her entire life building an audience instead of a family, and audiences, unlike families, feel no obligation to stay for a flop. Nathan and Claire separated within 2 months. I want to be careful here, because the internet loves a simple villain and a simple ending, and the truth deserves better. It was not the money alone. It was that the money had shown Claire, in stark and undeniable numbers, exactly how much of a partner Nathan had chosen to be. 22 deposits in a row, while she canceled her gym membership and blamed herself. Some things, once you've seen them in a bank statement, cannot be unseen over a candlelit dinner. He didn't fight the divorce. He didn't fight anything anymore. He apologized to her more than once, and, this is my honest read, for whatever a father-in-law's read is worth, he meant it every time. Meaning it, unfortunately, is the participation trophy of apologies. It counts. It just doesn't count for enough. Now I have to tell you about the phone call I made that October because, more than the dinner, more than the folder, this is the part of the story I'd want my grandchildren to know. That fall, Colby Outdoor Services lost its biggest contract, a commercial property group whose managing partner belonged to Laurel Ridge, and had heard some family drama through the club grapevine, and decided the association was untidy. 8 men worked for Nathan. 8 men who mowed lawns and laid stone in 90-degree heat, who had wives and kids and truck payments, and who had never met Margaret Colby in their lives. When I heard, I sat with it for one evening. Then I called the managing partner, a man who has bought cabinetry from me for 20 years, and I told him the truth, that the drama he'd heard about was real, that the man at the center of it had been a fool but not a thief, and that if he punished 8 innocent crews for one woman's greed, he'd be finishing the job she started. The contract was reinstated within the week. I did not do it for Nathan. I want to be precise about that. Whatever I'd felt for him as a son-in-law had been transferred, in full, $16,600 at a time, into a closed account. I did it because there is a version of winning that requires everyone attached to your enemy to burn. And I have seen men pursue that version, and I have watched what it does to them, and I decided a long time ago, in a 2-car garage, that I would rather build things than salt earth. Revenge, if that's what we're calling this, only's clean. If you can hold the line between the people who did the harm and the people who were merely standing near it. Margaret earned every consequence that found her. 8 men in work boots earned none of them. That distinction is the whole difference between justice and appetite. And then came the night in late October. Cold rain coming down sideways, the kind Pittsburgh manufactures locally. Our doorbell rang a little after 9. I opened the door, and there on my porch stood Margaret Colby. No umbrella. The cream cashmere cardigan soaked through and gone gray at the shoulders. A single duffel bag at her feet, darkening in the rain. The condo was gone. The sun was gone. Nathan, in the settling of everything, had finally at 32, changed the locks. Her sister in Cleveland, I would later learn, had taken her in for 5 weeks, and then asked her to leave. She had worked her way down her entire list of options, and at the bottom of the list, at 9 o'clock on a rain-lashed Tuesday, was my porch. Franklin, she said, and her voice had none of the country club polish left in it. It was just a voice, old and wet and stripped. I have nowhere to go. Just for a few nights, please. I want to tell you exactly what happened inside me in that doorway, because it's the truest thing in this whole story. The porch light was throwing rain shadows across both of us, and I felt the old instinct rise. The one my mother raised into me, the one that built everything I have. A person on your doorstep in a storm is a person you help. It rose in me all the way to my throat. And I stood there, and I let it pass through me and out the other side. And here is why. Because I looked at that woman and I understood, with complete clarity, that she was not sorry. She was wet. Those are different conditions. In 4 months there had been no letter to Claire, no repayment offered, no accounting, no amends, not one syllable of genuine reckoning, only the search for the next room she could stand in, the next door that would open. If I opened mine, I would not be sheltering a changed woman. I would be handing a demolition expert the keys to the last building she hadn't gotten to. Kindness without boundaries isn't virtue. It's just an unlocked door with a good reputation. I hope you find somewhere warm and safe tonight, Margaret, I said. It won't be here, and I closed the door. Gently, the same deliberate, unhurried way I had once set down a champagne glass in front of 30 witnesses. Bass first. One clean sound. Ellen was in the kitchen when I came back down the hall. 2 mugs of tea already made, steam curling up into the lamplight, because of course she'd heard, and of course she'd known what I would do, possibly before I did. She slid 1 mug across the table. You did the right thing, she said. I know, I said, and sat down across from the woman I met over wood glue 38 years ago. Doesn't mean it felt good. It's not supposed to feel good, she said. It's supposed to be right. We drank our tea and listened to the rain, and for the first time in almost a year, the house felt entirely, quietly ours. It's been a while now, since that October night, and I want to spend these last few minutes not on Margaret, but on what came after. Because a story like this one is only worth your time if it leaves you with more than the satisfying sound of a door closing. Claire is thriving, and I use that word with a craftsman's precision. She took her half of the house sale. The kids sold the Squirrel Hill place by mutual agreement. Cleanly, the mortgage paid off in full, and my name released from it forever. And she put a down payment on a small brick row house in Lawrenceville, with a workshop in the basement. And I mean an actual workshop, because it turns out the granddaughter of a cabinetmaker had opinions about built-in shelving all along. She laughs again, loudly at her own jokes before the punchline sometimes, exactly like her mother. The first Sunday dinner in the new place, she stood in her own kitchen. Hers, one name on the deed, and she raised a glass of good Sancerre she'd bought herself and said, "To proper households." And Ellen laughed so hard she had to sit down. But it took work to get there, and I'd be lying to you if I skipped this part. Quietness like Claire's doesn't leave the day the villain does. She spent months with a good counselor, unlearning the reflexes a year in that house had trained into her. The flinch before speaking, the apology before the sentence, the instinct to check the room's weather before having a feeling. One evening she told me something I'll carry the rest of my life. She said, "Dad, the scariest part, looking back, isn't what she took. It's how normal it all felt by the end. You don't notice yourself shrinking. You just notice one day that you fit in a smaller space. If you hear nothing else tonight, hear that. That is how it works. Not with a slammed door, but with 1,000 reasonable-sounding requests to be a little quieter, a little smaller, a little easier. Whoever you are, whatever your house looks like, if you have been shrinking to fit a space someone else keeps redrawing, that is not love. That is renovation, and you are the wall coming down." Nathan sends Claire a check every month against the $47,600. Nobody ordered him to. The settlement didn't require it. Vivian tells me that by her math, he'll have repaid every dollar in about 2 more years. He runs his cruise. He sees a counselor of his own. Claire heard that through a mutual friend, and he has not, as far as anyone knows, spoken to his mother since the locks changed. I don't know what Nathan's story looks like in 10 years. I hope it looks like a man who finally understands that being a good son to a bad architect just means you build her ruins for her. He was given a mother who taught him that love is a debt collected monthly. It will take him years to learn otherwise, and it is no longer my daughter's job to teach him. And honestly, that last part might be the biggest lesson in this whole story. You can wish someone healing without volunteering to be the hospital. Margaret, I'm told, lives outside Cleveland now in a small apartment on a fixed income, near a sister who speaks to her at Christmas. I don't celebrate that. I want to be honest with you because we've come this far together. There is no dancing on that particular grave, because there's no grave. Just a woman who spent 70 years mistaking control for love and audiences for family, sitting, now with neither, having been defeated by nothing more exotic than paperwork and patience. If she ever writes my daughter a real letter, the kind with a reckoning in it instead of a request, I believe Claire is a big enough person to read it. But forgiveness, if it ever comes, will be a gift Claire chooses to give, on her timeline, for her own peace. It will not be a door Margaret gets to knock on. That's the boundary, and boundaries were the whole war. So let me leave you with what I actually learned. One craftsman's honest inventory. The people who underestimate you are handing you the exact advantage you need. All you have to do is let them keep believing it a little while longer. It costs nothing to be underestimated except pride, and pride is the cheapest lumber in the yard. Kindness and stupidity are not the same thing, and the moment someone confuses one for the other, they have already begun writing the story of their own downfall. You do not need to correct them, you just need to keep receipts. Quiet as data. If someone you love has gone quiet, laughs less, apologizes more, checks the weather of a room before speaking, do not wait for a 2A. Phone call. Ask. Ask twice. The first answer is usually the one they've been trained to give. Protecting your family sometimes means staying silent far longer than feels bearable, so that when you finally do speak, every single word arrives with the proof already attached. Anger is a power tool, loud, fast, and useless without a measured line to cut along. Patience is the measuring. Do the measuring. And the last one, the one I paid the most for. Help is holy, but it is not unconditional. A person on your doorstep in a storm is a person you help, unless they are the storm. Then you may close the door gently, bass first, one clean sound, and go drink your tea with the people who never once made you smaller. That is not cruelty. That is, at long last, a proper household. If someone in your life has ever mistaken your kindness for weakness, if you've ever been the one they called too soft, too old, or too simple to notice what they were doing, tell me about it in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll tell you, the comment section of my channel has become something like a front porch, where people finally say the things they held for years. If this story hit home, hit that like button so it finds the next person who needs it. Subscribe to my channel and ring the bell, and share this with someone who is, right now, shrinking to fit a space somebody else keeps redrawing. They'll know it's for them. I'll see you in the next story. This story is a work of narrative storytelling drawn from real-life situations, personally researched, written, and edited by our human creative team. Names, characters, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, and any resemblance to specific persons or events is coincidental. This content reflects human experience, human judgment, and human hands at every step, and is intended for entertainment and reflection. Nothing in this video constitutes legal or financial advice. If you are facing a similar situation, please consult a qualified professional in your area.